In this chapter, I want to talk about insurance and the pension system. Basically, that the way that the finance system works in general through the insurance industry. Because the insurance industry is not only issuing policies, but they're also typically involved in defined benefit pensions most of the time. So we obviously at West Oahu, we have actually a pretty strong insurance program, even on this campus. But the idea with insurance and buying insurance is that you basically know that a certain risk exists and you can't avoid that risk, but what you're going to do is transfer that risk. You're going to pay money to transfer that risk to someone else, and someone is basically going to take on that risk in return for you paying the premium. You can read this slide here, but you, for instance, in Hawaii, you have to do one of two things. You either have to have car insurance, or you need to have a statement that's affirmed by a bank that says, I agree to take on the risk of causing an accident. Most of us don't have that kind of wealth, though. So we pay a premium to Geico or whoever to take on that risk instead. Same with right, the kind of insurance that's typically not bought, and I'm always surprised that people don't buy it, would be flood insurance. I mean, even if you don't live in a floodplain, the risk of a flood is pretty real, especially with global warming. So it seems odd to me that someone wouldn't pay someone else to take on that risk, especially given how relatively inexpensive flood insurance is, given the risk that actually exists out there. Within the insurance market, we have three problems that have to be dealt with. We have moral hazard, adverse selection, and asymmetric information. In asymmetric information, basically, what we know is that those who look for insurance are those who consider themselves most at risk. Now, for flood insurance, that's not really a good example because it's not like I know, right? There's floodplain maps and whatnot that would say what the risk is of a flood. But let's say I was looking for life insurance. Well, I'm probably going to be really seeking out life insurance if I know I'm going to die, right? Or if I just found out some bad news from a doctor that I have a terminal illness, then I'm really going to look for life insurance. Insurance companies know this, though, and in some part, they base their rates on a lot of different factors. But one of the things would be is, why did you start looking for insurance? Did you approach someone or did someone approach you? Then we've got adverse selection. In adverse selection, what we're talking about here is what kind of individual then has insurance, like health insurance. Is it only the unhealthy that have insurance, or do I have enough healthy people that are also seeking insurance? And then finally, you have moral hazard. What stops me once I am insured from behaving in the best interest of the insurance company, which is bearing the risk? In other words, what stops me from driving like a demolition derby driver, or what stops me from eating a whole bunch of fried food once I have health insurance? Well, the fact that there's a deductible and copay certainly would stop me from eating a ton of fried foods. And so insurance companies basically then have to design their products to get around these three problems of asymmetric information, adverse selection, and the moral hazard. So the way that these policies work is that you've got a big insurance company that then sells its policies through brokers and agents. The client would be you and I, the people that buy the policies from the company through the brokers and agents. The insurance company, when you want to buy the policy, they need to know what price to charge you. For the most part, they're going to need to engage in some underwriting, meaning that they're going to need to take an assessment of the risks that they're going to be taking on. So, for instance, I bought more life insurance last summer, and I had to go in to get a medical exam. And yeah, no one loves a medical exam, but it just makes sense for the insurance company, and it makes sense for me to get an affordable policy price, right? There are insurance policies out there where you can avoid the doctor. But if you're trying to avoid the doctor, right, let's go back again to our issues of like moral hazard and adverse selection. If I'm looking for life insurance and I don't want a medical exam, then it's either one of two options. Either you really don't like doctors and you don't want this medical exam, or you're really scared of what the results might be. One or the other, it's not good either way. And so I might still write you a policy, but I'm going to charge you a bunch of money for it. And then once that data is collected through the health exam, then the actuaries are going to say, well, if you're a certain weight, you have this percent chance of getting this disease, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, sorry, the last part here was, then if you do have to file a claim, you then have to deal with the adjuster. The adjuster comes out, assesses what happened, and then tells the insurance company to issue a check. The insurance industry is heavily regulated, primarily at the state level. My wife, I mean, she's a broker primarily, but she does sell insurance as well, just as kind of a part of the general products sold. She has to have licenses in all of the states where policies are issued. So she's got this like wall that's got like 5 or 10 different state licenses to sell insurance. For the most part, states do a pretty good job of regulating the industry. There are bad actors out there. Georgia is notorious for not regulating them strongly, but another state like Massachusetts is well known for regulating them heavily, as is New York State. Let's start talking about some of the particular insurances. So we got life insurance. Life insurance is pretty old as a type of financial product. Basically, based on the year you were born, insurance companies have a pretty good idea of when you're going to die. And the idea is that once you buy the policy, you're going to pay that premium for a certain number of years. Well, they want to, on average, that you pay enough in premiums to pay out all the claims made, on average. So that would mean an insurance company needs to issue a lot of policies to get that average rate out there. Which would mean that the younger you are and the healthier you are, you're going to pay the least in premiums. The older you are and the less healthy you are, pay much higher premiums. My mother-in-law is 70 years old, not in the greatest of health. She can get life insurance. But she's gonna get that oh, that one from Alex Trebek. He sells like Colonial Life Insurance. No medical exams. You're going to get a price in a minute. I would do it, but I would have to give my email address and phone. I would do it in live time, but I don't want to get all these emails. Guaranteed acceptance. I mean, that's actually not a good thing for you as a person who's going to have to pay these premiums. If everything is guaranteed, that means that they're going to have to they can't be offering very much in benefits given what you're paying. No exam or health questions. What if I just had a heart attack yesterday? Under all these circumstances, it looks like I'd be covered. Now, how do they do this? Because they generally have a pretty big window of initial time where they won't pay any claims, or what they'll pay out if you die too soon, they'll only give you back your premiums, what you paid on a monthly basis. There's lots of different kinds of policies out there: whole life, term life, universal, variable, and annuities. What I'll tell you is universal life and variable life are generally pretty expensive, and they generally appeal to less sophisticated insurance purchasers, because they can sell themselves off as like, you get to invest in the stock market or in mutual funds with your premiums to be able to pay for things, and it builds up cash value over time, so you could cash out your life insurance policy if you were ever short on cash. You got to pay for all those kinds of things. My general belief about investing, even in general, is you buy the type of product for the kind of thing you're trying to do. In this case, I'm just trying to pass off the risk to someone else that I die prematurely. Because if I die prematurely, then my kids are going to have a harder time paying for school. The house mortgage is going to have a harder time getting paid off. So in my case, when I bought my life insurance policy last year, I already had a term life policy from when my first child was born. So then I bought a whole life policy. My term life policy was a 30-year term. That would mean that I basically pay my premiums for 30 years. On the 30th year, I make my last payment, and the policy basically ends. And if I didn't die, some of you may say, well, then Shadi, you wasted all those premiums. But I didn't, because I needed to live for 30 years to do right. At that point, my son will be 30 years old. Dude, Truman, if you can't figure it out by age 30 and I died, I mean, you don't need the money then, but if I died now and he's only 7 years old, dude, he's going to need a lot of money to pay for all the things that I would normally pay for if I were alive. That's the whole point of term life. But the policy I just bought was whole life. Whole life because I keep on taking on these additional financial responsibilities, like now the house, right? I've got another kid being born here now any day now. So these are all additional things that I might not want to buy a policy that limits itself to 20 years or 30 years. So I'm just going to make regular payments now for a policy that will exist until I'm dead. And then you've got annuities, which is at the very bottom of this slide. I own annuities as well. The whole point of the annuity is it's basically like a savings account. It's as a professor, I belong to a pretty old school group called TIAA CREF, which is called the Teachers Insurance Annuity Association um, College Retirement Equity Fund, um, TIAA CREF. Um, it's it's just an incredibly safe, boring way to save money to be able to use it later. I didn't intend to do that, but you know what I'm doing here. Um, as the as we entered 2020, we had about 700 to 800 insurance companies. There's a great deal of consolidation in the life insurance business. Um, famous one that got bailed out during the 2008-2009 crisis was AIG. But again, AIG just basically buys lots of small insurance companies out there. All the big insurance companies are buying the smaller ones. My father gets his insurance from a small place called Badger Insurance. I once did a job interview in Erie, Pennsylvania, where the big thing they had was Erie Insurance. Erie, Pennsylvania. Ugh. Well, it looks like they sell auto, home, business, and life. Is Erie a good insurance company? It's a strong choice for auto insurance. 1925. Yes. Pretty boring. Then you've got the health insurance industry. Here in Hawaii, we have two major insurance companies. We have two major, and then you get a few minor ones. So a minor one would be something like HMAA. But the big ones would be HMSA, which has about 70% of the market. And then you've got Kaiser that has about 20% of the market. And then the remainder is picked up by all the little guys. For the most part in the United States, we still do have an employer-based healthcare system, meaning that most people get their health insurance through either their own employment or their parents' employment. We as employees pay the premiums, and the employer pays a bigger chunk of that premium. But one of the problems is that I, for instance, don't really see as a person, right? I'm about to have a child here. Well, not me, my wife is. I, I mean, I know because I'm an economist that having a child, the delivery costs are about $20,000. If the kids are delivered the old school way, nothing too fancy or anything, just popping out. That's about $20,000 at Kapiolani. All I end up paying is, I think I have to pay like I think I have to spend about $2,000. So I'm spending basically about 10% of it. Not very much. Which in part causes a problem, right? Maybe for me, Shiting, it doesn't stop me then from having more kids because I'm like, it only costs $2,000 to deliver, to deliver kids. So I'm gonna have one more and one more and one more. The other side of this is that even for things like, oh, I broke my arm, I'm going to use the emergency room rather than urgent care, or I have a sniffle, I'm going to go to urgent care rather than just like toughing it out. um I'm I don't know what the prices are for the things because all I know is that I just have to pay my like $20 copay or whatnot. But also doctors um, inflate the price of health care in the United States, but also health insurance because they order expensive tests. And I don't know because I don't know they're expensive because my insurance company pays for it. Um, and the doctor wants to then see me once a week for dealing with some illness, even though maybe I don't need to be seen that frequently. But again, that's because the physician wants to keep getting that money. The result is that whereas most countries in the world have government delivered care, meaning the government employs the doctors that deliver the care, um, the United States is unique in having privatized doctors and, for the most part, privatized insurance to pay for those costs. Then you've got your property and casualty insurance. This would be basically all the things that could happen based on bad things out there in the world happening. Um, named perils. That's easy. Look for a name. Flood insurance means that I have to have water coming from an outside source, like outside the home, then coming onto my property and destroying my home. That's different than a pipe bursts in my house and that pipe causes the water damage. Even though water caused the damage, it's two different sources of water. The first pipe would be paid by my homeowner's insurance. A flood from the mountains would be covered by flood insurance. And then you've got hurricane insurance. Hurricane insurance would be damage caused by a named storm. The homeowner's policy that I just mentioned, that's more of like kind of like open peril. It pays for a lot of different things that could happen in the house. Fire, a tree falls down on top of the roof, um, someone, termites eat things and the house falls down, mold starts growing. All those would be open perils, right? Lots of different things it could possibly be. Um, and then you've also got liability and casualty insurance. So, for instance, I drive a pretty old car. I don't insure the car itself because it's a pretty old car and the value is incredibly low. But I do carry, as required, um, I pay for someone else's car if I damage their car, and also if they were to die or get hurt, my insurance would pay for that. That's under casualty and liability insurance. And then going back to The Big Short, that movie, you've got things known as credit default swaps. Credit default swaps are basically when there's a risk that the financial instrument that you could have a default of that financial instrument based on that company or that company's bonds. And what we would do is um, the insurance companies during the 2008 2009 crisis, they didn't think that people would actually default on these credit swaps, that people would always be paying their mortgages. So these mortgage-backed securities, which are basically this collection of mortgages, no one thought these things would fail, but the company issuing them still had to get insurance, and they would get this insurance, and insurance companies would issue these policies based on the belief that the bonds would never go bad, but in fact they did. Because the company that bought most of the credit default swaps was AIG. And then we've got our pension plans. Here in Hawaii, they're actually still, because at least compared to the mainland, you still actually have a fairly large number of defined benefit plans out there, but they're not 10%, 15% of employees are covered by a defined benefit pension. A defined benefit pension, so these are called DB plans, versus things like a 401k that you probably have heard of, or 403b. Those are known as defined contribution plans. So I actually use both of these kinds right now. I'm a state employee. So as a state employee, I have a defined benefit pension. The defined benefit pension for me is determined by a formula, which I would imagine most of my colleagues do not know, but I do. It is 0.0175% times number of years I worked times my monthly salary over my 5 highest paid years. Let's make my life easy here. This is not my salary. Let's say I made $120,000 a year, which would then give me a $10,000 a month salary. Let's say that I worked for the state for 20 years, and then I multiplied that by 0.0175. Sorry, I gotta get my calculator here because there's no way in hell I can solve that on my own. So it'd give me about $3,500 a month. In my case, I do have to contribute money to this pension plan. I contribute about 9% of my salary to this. But as you can see here, I don't actually think about what the market conditions are or anything like that. My monthly pension is basically going to be determined by this formula, 0.0175 times number of years I worked times my monthly salary. But there's a risk, as I see it, as an economist, as I see it from this, is that what if the market does really, really well? All I'm going to get is $3,500 a month based on this equation. So thus you could have the defined contribution plan. Because I work for a non-for-profit, basically UH, I have what's called a 403b. It's the same thing as many of you have with a lot of your parents have, which is called a 401k. Defined contribution. There is no guaranteed benefit that I'll receive when I retire. What I'm doing, making up these numbers, this is not what I'm contributing. Let's say I contribute $500 a month. That's $6,000 a year. So that's the money I have flowing into the fund. I now need to decide what investment to buy with that money that's coming in every month, right? Maybe I'll buy, let's say I work for Boeing. Maybe I'll buy Boeing stock as that. So I'm going to buy $6,000 of Boeing stock every year. And that value is going to fluctuate over time. And then when I retire, I'm going to cash out that stock to be able to earn some money. There we go. There's our defined contribution plans. The biggest benefit to a defined contribution plan is you can totally move around from employer to employer. I mean, it's pretty easy. as a defined benefit plan with state of Hawaii, you're stuck with the state of Hawaii, right? I to meet to make it worthwhile for me, I need to have a lot of years of service. If I stop and I only work for the state for 5 years, actually I wouldn't even be vested. Let's say I work for them for 10 years. Let's even just say that the rest of the numbers are all the same. Then it's going to be half for working half as long. Not necessarily fair. The problem with the pension system here in Hawaii is that, for instance, I pay 9% of my salary, and I do. I'm required to. It's taken out of my paycheck. I pay 9% every year. The state should be contributing 26%. My 9% and that 26% are added together to be 35% of my salary, and that should be going to the pension fund. But it's not. Because of COVID, the state has said, dude, we don't have the 26%. So now the problem is that only 9% of the money is going in. And the state's basically saying right now, we'll catch you on the flip side. We'll cover it later. That's pretty dangerous because now what's happening is that the pension fund can't invest that money, can't invest at 26%. They can only invest 9%. And the idea with the pension fund is that it's able to make promises based on, it's able to make those financial promises based on the investments that are made. But it can't buy stocks and equities if it doesn't have the money to do it, which it doesn't here in this case because it doesn't have the 26%. So I have a public pension, a defined benefit public pension, but I also have another one, just as most of you do, which would come in the form of Social Security. Social Security, we would see that on our paycheck as OASDI, or you would see it as Social Security. It works out to be 7.65%. 7.65% of your pay is used to go into Social Security. Your employer pays the same amount, 7.65%, which then allows you at age 62 to retire. It's in essence, a defined benefit pension. It's one of the last few ones out there. Again, I wish this was an in-person class because I have a lot more I could say about this topic.